read Ezekiel, Ezekiel is like, to my mind, a stupendous literature. I mean, probably some of the greatest literature ever written, and it's 6th century BC. And it's actually probably mostly authentic. So to get a, quote, Zionist tract, I mean, if you want to get a Zionist tract, Ezekiel is the man. And if you read that, how he presents what he thinks God is going to do in terms of prophecy, you can have your mind blown. I think the Mormons were reading that. I treat that in an Old Testament class. Next term I'll be doing an Old Testament class next fall. I don't teach in the spring because I'm one of these half people that cut me in half. So I'm only, it's like I'm a eunuch, if you like. They cut my bottom parts off or whatever, but that's a joke. I'm dealing with eunuchs in my Christianity class because Jesus says at one point you should make yourself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven. And in another book of Acts, we have a guy who's a eunuch getting involved in baptism, an Ethiopian queen's eunuch. So if you know your scripture, you know what I'm talking about. So the Mormons really got into prophets like Ezekiel, I think, even though they forgot where the ideas came from and just started having it as part of their own doctrine. But certainly people like Joseph Smith and the founders of Mormonism who said, let's go west, let's start our own Zion. That's where they're getting it from. And you know, Utah was considered to them Zion. And that's where they get it from. But also fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians. And not so much Catholics or high church Christians who really get more into what we would call catechism in Catholicism and don't really read the scripture as such. But grassroots Protestantism, I guess from the Reformation and the problems in England that had occurred, when the English were fighting over whether you would have individual churches and a grassroots sort of Christianity, Congregationalism, baptism, Baptists, those kind of groups. And there's lots of different variations of it. I couldn't even enumerate all the different Protestant groups that spin off from there. Seventh-day Adventists, Congregationalists, and so on. Black African AME Baptist groups and so on. There's just a whole host of different spin-offs from that. Methodists. When they were fighting those things out, they thought you should go back to the book. They thought that every man or woman should have his book, have his own Bible. Catholicism, it wasn't so important to have your book. You just had the sacraments. If you did the sacraments, like you know, confession, communion, stuff like that, which really isn't even in the book to any extent. More like the ritual of the church that they emphasize. Protestants didn't emphasize that. They emphasized the book. So the frontier of America was built up with the book, which is why people say, well, why is America so religious? It's not so much that it is religious, that the frontier of America was built on the book. These people came from those kind of groups from England primarily at the beginning. And they brought the book with them wherever they went. So if you went to a log cabin, for instance, where Lincoln would have been born, the only book on the table would have been the Bible. And they read from that book. They didn't so much care what the minister or the priest or someone else said about that book. They read it themselves, to their people, which is why someone like Lincoln could be so incredibly eloquent. How could someone like that, who never even been to high school, basically, self-educated person, be so totally eloquent in English, write English better than all of us, right? How can that be? Because he read the Bible all the time. And the Bible was like a handbook of eloquence, the translation into English. So now Protestant groups too are very Zionistic now. Evangelical Protestant groups. Why? Because for them, reading the scripture as they do and taking the prophets seriously, the return of the Jewish people to Palestine is considered to them an important religious precondition of the coming of what they consider to be the return, the rapture, the Messiah's return, and so on. And the reason they think that is that in their reading of the prophets, that's what's there. So one of the biggest miracles that they have to show their religionists in the 21st century is the return of this miraculous restoration of the Jewish people out of the ashes to Palestine. So actually, some of the most confirmed Zionists that you'll meet are not so much Jews as evangelical Christians. Evangelical Christians are even interested in rebuilding the Third Temple, which of course Muslims and others look upon with horror. Liberals, many Reformed Jews, others. This is like horrific idea that they should even consider such a thing. But evangelical Christians think that would be quite normal. Why? Because it's all in the scriptures. It's all in the prophets. It's all in the Bible. So Zion has to do with all those things. Have you got that?
So they're talking about creating the state of Israel.
Yeah. Well, what happened was the founder of the so-called Zionist movement that this book would be talking about, The Chosen, is a person called Peter Herzl. I teach a course on Zionism too, if you're interested. I'm going to do that 2 years from now. I'm going to do that in my last term here, if I survive that long, inshallah, God willing, etc. And I think these are interesting courses. This is my least interesting course, by the way. I think I do interesting courses. I know I'm arrogant. But I think I'm a colorful guy. I try to keep being colorful even though I'm almost dead. And I try to do courses that don't bore people. And I try to do a variety of courses. So this course, Modern Jewish Thought Zionism, is for everybody. And I'm going to do that not this fall, but the fall after this. So if you're interested in this subject, the history of Zionism, I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Okay, so in the book, the one father is considered, a Zionist because he was fighting for creating the state.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and then the Hasid didn't believe.
No, he didn't believe. They were called anti-Zionists.
But they thought it's because they thought it should be created after the Messiah shows up?
Yeah.
So is that just like a...
No, it's not a fine point because the Messiah never comes, you know.
No, what I mean, is that just like an interpretation then?
Yeah, it's like putting it off into the indefinite future, because anything men do is going to be imperfect. Why do it if it's going to be imperfect? Of course, everything is imperfect. We live in an imperfect country. We try to make it better. Obviously, the Jews in Israel are not living in a perfect country. They have their shortcomings, their faults. And everyone, we hear in the Islamic world about all of our faults. Don't hear so much about their own faults, but everyone has shortcomings. So this kind of Hasidic person would think that men meddling in God's affairs was a bad thing. But also I think it was a power play. In a country like Israel, these kind of people aren't going to have any power. People like this Rebbe, Whereas in Brooklyn,